Have you ever been told to do something or else? Pressured into fitting in, doing the popular thing? Then you've had a taste of bullying and peer pressure. And sadly, our kids are dealing with this every day. These experiences can be the trigger that leads some kids down the path of substance misuse. I'm Jodie Sweetin, and on this episode of Awkward Conversations, we're diving into the world of bullying and peer pressure to understand their effects and how we, as parents, can equip ourselves and our children to handle these challenges. Today, we are turning fear into empowerment. And today, I am joined by a wonderful co-host, Dr. Krystal Lewis. Dr. Krystal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work primarily with kids in the realm of stress and anxiety. We also have with us here today Jodee Blanco. She's the author of the seminal New York Times bestseller, Please Stop Laughing at Me, that established her as the first voice of the anti-bullying movement. For the past 20 years since its release, she has been working inside America's schools, turning her pain into purpose through her landmark anti-bullying program, INJA. It's not just joking around. She has written multiple books on bullying, speaks all over the country, and has helped hundreds of schools create a kinder, more compassionate culture. Welcome, Jodee.
Hello, I'm honored and delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you're here for this conversation today. A study published in the School Psychology Quarterly in 2019 demonstrated that both victims and perpetrators of bullying are more likely to use substances than their peers who are not involved in bullying on either side. And in particular, it was found that victims of bullying were 3.4 times more likely, and bullies were actually 1.6 times more likely to use substances than those not involved in bullying. Only 20% of bullying is actually reported, so it's likely that your kid will not tell you. It's really important to know the signs, but before we even get into the signs of bullying, Jodee, I'd love to hear from you what bullying actually is.
Really, there's two forms of bullying, right? So there's the overt type of bullying that's aggressive behavior, chronic, aggressive, unkind behavior, teasing, digital bullying, all the overt forms of unkindness. But there's another form of bullying that's even more insidious, that type of victim I call the invisible student. I always tell kids, bullying isn't just the mean things we do. It's all the nice things we never do. Letting someone sit alone at class, letting someone walk alone to class, knowing that there's a certain classmate who looks up to you and your friends and would give anything if you included them just one time, and yet you never do. The cold stare, being looked past and through instead of at, being made to feel invisible, like you don't even exist. And that's a form of bullying that a lot of schools and parents don't think about because it's more subtle. And I always tell parents that if the bully is being aggressive with your child, constantly calling your child names, making fun of them, pushing them into a locker, as awful as that is, at some point your child will likely say, there's something wrong with that bully. But if all the bully ever does is look past them and through them instead of at them, talk about them instead of with them, just stare at them, not say a thing as they pass you in the hall, it may lead your child to say not what's wrong with the bully, but what's wrong with me? And when a child starts asking themselves, what's wrong with me? That's when we know the potential for long-term damage has taken root. And that's one of the biggest danger signs that parents need to look for.
And I love that you talked about the isolation bullying, because so often people tell themselves, I'm not a bully, I'm not mean. But if you do not acknowledge someone's existence, their humanity, their feelings, that can be far more damaging than actually shoving somebody sometimes, because, like you said, it erodes that sense of self and that sense of self-identity. Now, the obvious signs of bullying, we talked about unexplained injuries, if your kid is coming home with bruises on their arms, lost or destroyed items. I know that's always a big one. Kids will take each other's phones and throw them in the toilet, or take each other's computers or their jackets or whatever. And if you see this stuff going on often, or your kid is often coming home with, what happened to your jacket? Why is this broken? What is asking those questions and being cognizant of that? But that underlying sense of what is wrong with me, I think, is something that parents really have to pay attention to. Krystal, what are some of the things that you have seen in your practice with kids who are suffering from being bullied or being ostracized?
Yeah, I think the social dynamics can be quite difficult and to navigate for kids. And oftentimes kids who are being bullied will talk about feeling like they're not enough. We'll see increases in anxiety and increases in depression. And then this often leads to a lot of avoidance behavior. And so kids will try to avoid going to school or maybe athletic activities, practices, wherever the bully is. Then the child is then trying to avoid going these places. And so I think it's important to have these conversations with the parents, not just about the signs, right? But to discuss with the child what they're experiencing so that they don't internalize, I'm unlikable, right? There's something about me. It's talking about the whole situation and what's going on.
I also found with my kids, my daughters are 15 and 13 now, but when they were younger in elementary school and things like that, and even still now, but especially then, I would always pay attention to what kids' names am I constantly hearing them talk about in the fray. You always hear at recess, oh, this kid was always doing this. And I would be like, I'm hearing this person's name a lot. And paying attention to those dynamics, and if there's a kid that's not letting your kid play with them every recess and is preventing them from making other friendships and things. I remember being a kid and it was like, you can't play handball. Well, why? Well, because they didn't like you. And that was so, it was like, what did I do?
And there are also, you have to be aware too, there are subtle signs that most people don't think about, most parents don't think about, most schools don't think about. For example, sudden makeover attempts. If you've got a child who's always been more on the preppy conservative side and then suddenly they're going goth, if you've got a child who's never been interested in sports, they've always been theater and speech, and suddenly they're trying out for lacrosse, sudden attempts to be someone they're not, to change who they are on the outside in the hopes that it will change the reception they get from others on the inside. Also, we always talk about my child's grades are going down, I'm worried they're being bullied. That's an obvious sign. But sometimes, more often than you would think, there's a sudden inexplicable increase in grades. This is especially prevalent among invisible students. The invisible student, the kid who isn't necessarily being bullied per se, or even necessarily intentionally excluded. It's just that kid who's not on anyone's social radar. Sometimes that child will throw themselves into academics thinking, if I get straight A's, everything's going to be different. So they hurl themselves into getting perfect grades and perfect scores, and then they achieve it and they realize they're just as lonely as when they started. And that can accelerate what you talked about before, depression. In my experience, and I've worked with thousands of them, and I was one, is what I call the ancient child. You might use the term old soul. This is the kid who is typically more verbally, socially, and intellectually sophisticated than their peers. They have a deeper capacity for empathy and compassion. Their vocabularies are rich. And in fact, when you're speaking to this child, they're so prepossessing that sometimes you have to remind yourself that you're just speaking to a kid. And a lot of parents adultify these kids sooner than they should be. And they assume because they're so socially and culturally mature on the outside that they're that emotionally mature on the inside. And these kids struggle to fit in because they're too grown up to connect with their classmates, but they're too young to have meaningful social lives with grown-ups. And often signs that they're struggling socially, they write more in their journal than they interact with other people. Disturbing poems, disturbing journal entries. A lot of them are artistic, and you'll see graphic, disturbing images of loneliness and isolation. They withdraw. And sometimes just their body language. If you're a mom, you know your kid's body language when their heart is sinking, and you need to act immediately.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. experienced a lot of bullying as a kid too, growing up in entertainment and also being an old soul. I was a kid who I skipped a grade in school. I was very ahead academically, all of these things, but that connection with peers was always really hard. I've never heard it explained that way, and that really touched me. So thank you for including those students, because they are often overlooked because they're smart or they're okay but the inside is really what's happening. But I love that you really bring up the different types of kids that get bullied, because we do think about maybe the awkward one or the one that might wear glasses or be heavier or things like that.
Here's the thing. The ancient child sees the world through an adult lens. They see the world the same way you and I do, but they experience life and feelings and emotions in the reality of their chronological age. And so they spend their adolescence in limbo. You're with your peers at school and they can see you and you can see them. And when you try to connect, it's like there's this invisible force field that repels you away from each other. And I've spent 20 years, I was brutally bullied all through school. And my term for the mean popular kid is the elite tormentor. And my term for the kind popular kid is the elite leader. The elite tormentors that I went to school with, not only do I work with them and are they a part of my life, the one who tormented me the most was the maid of honor at my wedding. The marriage didn't last, but the friendship has. And for 20 years, we've talked about what happened. Why didn't we connect? What was the dynamic? And their insights as adults who are now parents and even grandparents looking back has comprised 80% of the work I do and the reason I'm able to save lives. It isn't me. It's the people who tormented me who as adults taught me how to understand it.
That is such an incredible story. And so often we focus on the victims of bullying and the bullies as problematic kids, as mean, as the bully is the source of the problem, right? But when we take a step back, oftentimes the bully is themselves a victim of some sort of bullying from either a parent, a caregiver, or they don't have a good attachment to a caregiver or parent or anything. No parent likes to think that their child is capable of bullying or being the bully. And what do we do if we find out that our child is the bully? And it doesn't always happen that the child who is the bully is coming from maybe a poor background, but very often there is some sort of precipitating event that causes the children to react in this way.
Jodie, you are so spot on, and bravo for bringing that up. When I do a lot of work with teachers and principals and superintendents and parents, and what I always tell everyone, and even kids in a way that they can understand, the bully is rarely, if ever, a bad kid. Right. The bully is almost always a child in pain acting out in a cry for help. And if we don't answer those cries with compassionate, restorative forms of discipline that help these kids access their empathy and develop it like a muscle, we will continue to see what we're seeing in our schools. To give you an example, one of the meanest things that ever happened to me in school, this girl, my arch nemesis, Nadia, I worshipped her and her friends. They were like the celebrities of the school, the popular group. And she finally invited me to a party, a cool kids party. I spent all day getting ready. And when I showed up at the address she gave me, it was an empty parking lot in a forest preserve. And all the kids that I looked up to jumped out of the bushes and said, yeah, like we'd ever invite you to anything. I remember hatred filling my heart. I remember making sure that she got in trouble, that she was punished. 30 years later, the night of my reunion, I found out that she was mean to a lot of kids that semester because that was the same semester that her dad took his own life in front of her. And her mom said, don't tell anybody, just say that daddy died of a heart attack. Oh. How I wish I could go back to that moment, Jodie, how I wish I could go back and say to her, Nadia, I know you're not mean. I know this isn't who you really are. Something's wrong. How can I help? if you're a parent and your child is either the mean popular kid or the more traditional schoolyard bully, it doesn't mean your child is bad. And look at me, listen to me. It doesn't mean that you're a bad parent or that you screwed up. There's a hunger inside your child. Something is causing them to act out. Find out, do whatever it takes and address the hunger. Because once you do that, once you address it with compassionate, restorative, purpose-driven forms of discipline, and that hunger dissipates, who they truly are in their heart will come out.
Absolutely. Dr. Krystal, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, to Jodie's point, a lot of times the bullies who are demonstrating this externalized behavior, it could be representative of an internal struggle that they're having. And so I do think it's important for parents to pay attention to, okay, I'm seeing these signs, what's going on? A lot of times some bullies do have some form of trauma that they're living through and they're acting out behaviorally. It could be linked to other mental health symptoms. And so it is important to look on both ends at the bully and the victim and look at what's going on here in this dynamic. I think it's important to work with teachers, like you mentioned, working with the school and wherever. A lot of times bullying occurs where parents are not, right? And so where adults aren't, I should say. And so it's important to educate those who are working with kids to look for the signs of bullying behavior and then talk to that child, right? And figure out, well, what's going on? They're not going to readily just open up and say, hey, this is what's going on with me, right? But there are subtle signs that we could look for that may suggest that there's something deeper going on with this child or adolescent.
And so many times we hear this all the time, the child that is the most problematic is the one that is in need of the most love. Mm-hmm. Like you said with Nadia, like someone doing something so cruel and mean, but oh my God, she needed love and help.
You're watching Awkward Conversations Season 4.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Welcome back to Awkward Conversations Season 4.
And I think also our kids see how we treat other people out in the world too. Yeah. Our kids see who we acknowledge as being human and who we decide is not worth our gaze or our attention or humanity. And that comes in, I think, with so much bullying behavior.
I always look at this from a practical aspect because everybody talks theoretically and pedagogically. I'm just looking at the day-to-day. My kid is suffering. I'm losing my mind. Jodie, what do I do? And here are the steps. I'm about steps. So if you're a parent and let's say that your child is being bullied or invisibilized and you've gone to the school and you feel like the school hasn't done anything. You talk to the principal, they say yes, and then nothing happens. What do you do? How do you handle it if you feel like a school is stonewalling you? Step number one, you need to document and you need to engage your child. Too often parents want to protect their children from reality instead of preparing them from it. And they need to, the child needs to assume responsibility and learn to self-advocate, meaning write down I statements. When so-and-so did this, one sentence, this is how it made me feel, a sentence or two, this is why it made me feel this way. And have the parent help them document when it happened and were there witnesses so that the child feels empowered that I am advocating for self. Also, when you meet with the principal, if you're overreacting, if you're hysterical or disproportionately upset, you're going to lose credibility. You need to be calm and centered when you work with that school and tell the principal that you want to work in partnership with the parents of your child's bully or bullies and with the school. Because if you're a parent and your child is being bullied, if you approach it from what you have in common with the other parent is that you all love your kids. You want to make this work. You want to work in partnership with the school. And if you can advocate for compassionate, restorative forms of discipline, like random acts of kindness or a make a difference project, something that lifts up the bully, it's still something they have to do. It's still a responsibility, but it's something that deepens who they are inside, then everybody wins. And I want to jump in here too and say this because it can save lives.
Yeah.
One of the biggest mistake that parents in schools make, and I see it all the time when dealing with a bullying related situation, is, let's say you're a parent, right? And you love your kid so much, you immediately step into action with the school and you demand a meeting with the parents of the bullies, and you become institutionally focused, and all of the grown-up focus is on appropriate punishment for the bullies. And in fact, sometimes the parents of the victims will bully the school into punishing the bullies. And the whole adult focus is on appropriate punishment, consequences. Meanwhile, lying over here, and I've been that kid, and I've held that kid in my arms, bleeding inside, is the victim. One of the reasons that bullied kids attempt or complete suicide isn't necessarily because of the bullying itself. It's the unrelenting loneliness. It's the isolation. It's the sense that nobody gets me. Not my parents, not my stupid teachers, not the stupid kids at school. Nobody gets me, and they never will. So the first thing you need to do if you suspect your child is being bullied, in addition to working with the school, is perform triage. Find a therapist, someone your child can talk to. They save lives every day. And also find your child a brand new social outlet, separate from school, and get your child engaged where they can meet other kids the same age with whom they have something in common. You've got to perform triage on your lonely child, and then work institutionally in partnership with the school and the parents of the bullies, helping them to heal through that disciplinary process.
I also think that one of the things that we as parents do when our kids are being bullied, very oftentimes we go into like superhero mode, right? I'm going to save you. I'm going to intervene. Don't you worry. I've got you. And unfortunately, going back to the resilience and all of that we've talked about, how do I help you advocate for yourself? How do I help them stand up for themselves and find some of that confidence? And if they can't, then we figure out how to go from there.
Generally speaking, okay, here, what I teach kids is there's a difference between tattling and telling, or snitching and telling. Snitching and tattling is about revenge, and that is uncool. It's unkind, totally uncool. Telling is something else, because when you tell, you help everyone. I explain to kids, and parents need to understand this and explain it to their kids, that if a bully is mean to you, it's not because the bully doesn't like you. It's because that bully is hurting on the inside and they hurt you on the outside. Telling is an act of heroism. And then I provide kids with conversation starter cards, and I'll give you one here for this podcast. So you're a parent, right? And your child wants to tell on a bully, but they're afraid. So the conversation card goes like this. Hi, to your principal, Mrs. Smith. I have something I want to tell you, and I'm not telling you this because I want to get this person into trouble. I'm telling you because I think this person may already be in trouble and hurting on the inside, and I want you to help them stop hurting so they stop hurting me and others. When blank did this, this is how it made me feel. This is why it made me feel this way. Please, will you talk to this person and help them feel better, and let me know if I can help too. So that way kids become acculturated to the idea that telling is what heroes do. Telling is what the courageous kids do. Telling is what the cool kids do.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it's really just teaching these life skills. It goes beyond just identifying a bully and providing a consequence. It's teaching all kids how to show compassion, how to problem solve, how to advocate, how to be a good human.
But watching them go through it again, you're like, oh man, it's so just hormones, emotions, self-discovery. What as a parent can we do if our kid is just not the kid that fits in? They're a little bit different, and they're struggling to fit into sort of the mainstream. How can we help support those kids so that the loneliness and isolation isn't there?
Let's start with what we shouldn't do. The cliches don't work. Cliches like leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. They're just jealous. Ignore the bullies and walk away. I know how you feel. For example, Ignore the bullies and walk away. What's the one thing we tell kids all over the world? Don't be a bystander. If you see somebody getting bullied, stand up and defend that person. And then we'll turn around and say to that very same kid, oh, you're being bullied, just ignore it and walk away. Isn't that a mixed message? Aren't we, in effect, asking that child to be a bystander in his or her own life? And as adults, we tend to rely on those old cliches. So instead of the old cliches, you've got to sit your child down and you've got to tell your child, I don't know how you feel, and let them talk. If you tell them you know how they feel, what's their motivation for telling you? And then let them open up. And just listen. Sometimes we as parents have the fix-it syndrome, and we make the mistake of conflating a listening moment with a teaching moment. Sometimes your child just needs you to listen without making it about you and getting hysterical and getting all upset, and just listen. And then find your child, as we talked about before, an alternative social outlet, not necessarily something competitive, something where they can learn more about themselves and others as a natural catalyst for the discovery of friendships.
Thank you so much, Jodie, for sharing your story and what you have gained in your discussions about bullying and bullies. It was so informative, and I really hope that it encourages not only parents, but kids and everyone to remember that just when someone is acting out, it's often because they are deeply wounded inside. We say hurt people, but hurt kids. And so we have to be able to have some compassion for them as well, while also protecting our own kids and making sure that restorative practices, how are we teaching them to be resilient, to confront these things, because this stuff doesn't go away. As an adult, it's not like suddenly everyone stops bullying each other and being nice and getting along. No. But it's how do we teach them that in the process. And for all of the links and things that we've discussed, please go to our show notes. We're going to have all of that there for parents and those watching. I just thank you so much, Dr. Krystal and Jodie, for having this conversation today. And parents, just be aware. Listen to your kids. Again, it goes back to listening, not always wanting to fix it, not always wanting to be the one to run in with solution, but oftentimes just asking your kids, do you just need me to listen? I'm guilty of it sometimes. I want to go in and fix things, but sometimes I just have to take a step back and go, I just need to hear your experience right now, and then we'll figure it out from there. Jodie, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell people where they can find your books and your teachings and things about kids who are dealing with bullying?
Absolutely. If you're interested in my work or interested in bringing me into your child's school, my website is jodeeblanco.com. You can email me at jodie@jodeeblanco.com, and everything about me is there. My books, my work, the stuff I do. And parents, I can also say to you, exemplify the behavior that you want from your kids. Sometimes parents start bullying each other on social media because they take sides in a situation in which their kids are bullying each other. Mm-hmm. So be aware of your own behavior, because you are your child's first teacher and greatest beacon of light.
Yeah, and in closing, it's just imperative to remember that bullying is not a one-off, and it doesn't just go away. And so take action, figure out what steps you need to take as a parent, as a peer, as a teacher, but everyone can have a hand in reducing bullying.
Absolutely. Listening, taking action where appropriate, and just like you said, being there for our kids, that bond and relationship is what we talk about all the time.
Well, that's all for now. Tune in next week for more of Awkward Conversations Season 4. LGBTQ plus youth are almost 5 times as likely to attempt suicide and are significantly more likely to struggle with substance use. In this episode, we will discuss how you can support your LGBTQ child.
It's not their transness that increases their risk. It's their bumping up against society that is transphobic and homophobic that then increases their risk. Who can you talk to? Because what I don't want the parents to do is share their feelings of unease with their child. Let's not invalidate this child's experience, and that's the first thing that I think is really important.
That sense of community is what makes the child feel safe.
It's the empathy of
children who aren't maybe in the LGBTQ community that we really need to also emphasize, because the issue is the isolation, the loneliness, the bullying.
They internalize that inside and they use substances for relief and they use substances to cope.
How other people dress is not consent for you to say something or to comment. How other people look does not give you consent to comment on them or bully them. It's like, it's about the sovereignty of who you are as a person.
Make sure to check out GetSmartAboutDrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.